The city at 2 in the morning belongs to nobody and everybody at once. The streets are wide and empty, slicked dark with rain that hasn't stopped since before sunset, and the orange halos of the street lamps sit low in the mist like lanterns abandoned at sea. Daniel Mercer knew this city and its night hours better than most men knew the faces of their neighbors. He had walked these blocks for 6 years now, the route from the warehousing complex on Aldrich Street to his apartment on Cassidy Lane, and he could have traced the cracks in every sidewalk square from memory. Tonight he was later than usual. The loading bay on the 4th floor had flooded again, a pipe in the utility corridor having split at its seam sometime around midnight, and Daniel had spent the last 2 hours with a mop and a wet vac, and the particular kind of patience that the job required of him. He was 34 years old, and he carried himself like a man who had learned not to be angry at things that couldn't hear him. He mopped. He absorbed the water. He left the floor clean. His jacket was still damp when he reached Aldrich Bridge. It was a modest thing, iron rail, concrete deck. The sort of bridge a city builds not for beauty, but for the functional necessity of getting from one bank to another. The river below was high from the rain, moving faster than it ought. Dark as ink. Daniel paused at the midpoint, out of habit. He did this most nights. Not from any romantic impulse, just because this was where the city opened up a little, and the air felt less like a building pressing down on you. That was when he saw her. She was standing at the railing on the far side of the pedestrian walkway, her back to the street, both hands resting on the iron bar. She was wearing a pale coat, expensive looking even from this distance, and her dark hair was flattened against her skull from the rain. She had no umbrella. She wasn't moving. She was simply standing there, looking down at the water, and something in the stillness of her posture. Not the stillness of someone admiring a view, but the stillness of someone who had already made a decision, sent a cold thread of recognition through Daniel's chest. He had felt that stillness before. He had sat inside it once himself, in the first winter after his wife died. When Mia was 3 years old and sleeping in the next room, and the world had contracted to a single point of unbearable quiet. He had known then what the edge of a thing felt like. He began walking toward her. Not running might startle her. He kept his steps even. He was still 15 feet away when she leaned forward over the bar, slowly, with the kind of deliberate, exhausted momentum that looks almost peaceful from a distance. And then, she was gone. The sound she made entering the water was swallowed immediately by the rain. Daniel was over the railing before he could think about it. The river hit him like a wall. It was cold, the deep, physical cold of late autumn water that grabs at your joints and your lungs at the same moment, and the current was stronger than it looked from above, pulling at his legs with a steady, indifferent force. He got his bearings, found the pale shape of her coat in the dark water, and swam toward it with everything he had. She wasn't fighting the water. That was the part that stayed with him afterward. He got his arm around her, and she went limp against him. Not struggling, not helping, not resisting, just present in his arms, the way that a person is present when they have decided to stop being responsible for themselves. He hauled her toward the bank, using the current more than fighting it, pulling himself along a rusted drainage grate that jutted from the embankment until his knees found concrete. He got her onto the bank and turned her on her side and waited. She coughed once, twice, and then took a ragged breath that seemed to cost her everything. He pressed his fingers to her throat and found a pulse, faint but steady. He pulled out his phone and called for an ambulance, and then he sat there beside her in the rain, one hand on her shoulder, and looked at her face. She was younger than he'd expected. Late 20s, maybe 30. Her cheekbones were sharp, and her skin, even now, even soaked and blue cold, carried the kind of quality that doesn't come from anywhere except money. Her mascara had run in dark streaks below her eyes. She looked, in that moment, less like a person of means, and more like someone who had been crying for a very long time before she ever reached the bridge. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from the bridge. Daniel rode in the ambulance and sat in the emergency waiting room in his wet clothes, shivering under a thermal blanket a nurse had given him with the efficient, absent kindness of someone who gives out blankets many times a night. He had a daughter sleeping in a narrow bed, in a narrow apartment, 6 blocks away, tended tonight by Mrs. Paulson from downstairs. And he had work again, at 7 in the morning. There was no practical reason to stay. He stayed anyway. At around 4 in the morning, a doctor came to tell him the woman was stable, conscious, and asking the nurses not to contact her family. The doctor's name was Dr. Holt, a compact, gray-haired woman with the expression of someone who has seen this particular situation many times and has stopped being surprised by it. She said the patient's name was Evelyn Caldwell. She said Evelyn was refusing a psychiatric evaluation and had been asking for the man who brought her in. Daniel followed Dr. Holt down the corridor and stood in the doorway of the room. Evelyn Caldwell was sitting up in bed with an IV in her left arm and a hospital blanket pulled to her waist. She was looking at the window, a narrow rectangle of black glass reflecting the fluorescent ceiling, and when she heard him enter, she turned. She didn't say thank you. She looked at him for a long moment, the way someone looks at an unexpected variable in an equation they thought they'd already solved, and then she said, "Why did you jump in?" "Because you were drowning," Daniel said. "I know why I was drowning." She said it without hostility. Just as a correction. "I mean, why did you?" "You don't know me." He sat down in the chair beside the bed. Outside, the rain was still going. He could hear it against the window. "No," he said. "I don't." She turned back to the window. A silence passed between them that was not entirely uncomfortable, which surprised him. After a while she said, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone about tonight." "All right." She glanced at him. "You're not going to ask me anything? Do you want me to?" She considered that. "No," she said. "Not tonight." "Then I won't," he said. They sat together in the white-lit room for another hour. Daniel dozed in the chair. When he woke, the chair beside him was empty. The IV line had been disconnected and coiled neatly on the bedside table. The hospital blanket was folded at the foot of the mattress. There was no note. Evelyn Caldwell had simply walked out, sometime in the still hours before dawn, and left nothing behind her. The next 3 days passed the way most days passed for Daniel Mercer, in the rhythm of mop and bucket, of school pickups, and grocery runs, and the particular arithmetic of a life lived on the edge of what was possible. Mia was 7, and already too perceptive for her own good. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown and watchful, and she had a way of sitting across from Daniel at dinner and studying him that made him feel, sometimes, that she was the parent and he the child. "You seem far away,"